The early morning frosts, the dying ferns, the leaf skeletons, and the wilting mushrooms all reveal an incipient winter. However, you may not know it with the warm afternoons bringing out insects I thought were dead already. But the birds know it, and they seem to be hungry right now. The chickadees are actually brave enough to take seed from our hands, so it gives great opportunity to observe them up close. And it also gives the opportunity to record their flight in slow motion. Chickadees are one of the most acrobatic birds around, and having the ability to slow down their motions is pretty amazing. These birds probably have the ability to see this without our technology, though. Standard movies play at about 24 frames per second. This is faster than it needs to be for humans, but if you slow it down too much, the movie would look more like a slideshow of pictures than fluent motions. For a bird, however, this movie would look like a slideshow of pictures. For pigeons, the movie would have to be about 3 times this rate in order to look like fluid motion, according to a study from Trinity College in the UK on animal vision. It makes sense that birds would need to see in slow motion in order to react quicker, given that aviation is such a perilous endeavor. I've often watched large flocks of birds and wonder how they do not crash into each other. And watching birds fly at high speeds through these thickets and woods is pretty impressive. Furthermore, it must be extremely difficult catching an insect on the wing or avoiding another bird predator such as a Cooper's hawk. One odd thing I noticed is that since I turned my camera onto slow motion, not one single bird has landed in my hand to take the food. Perhaps they see something else us humans can't see in the camera, and it's making them nervous. I've been seeing a pileated woodpecker around still this week. Probably the same as last week. It is the female and it's hanging around the same general area. There's been loads of robins around the sanctuary lately. They gather in large flocks. We probably see 100 or 200 every day. However, it's really difficult to get more than one in a frame. They spread out just enough, and they're skittish, and any time I come by, they fly up to the treetops. The grapevines produced an abundance of fruit this year, so maybe they'll stick around for the winter and gorge on those. Right now, however, they mostly seem to be finding food off the ground, probably insects and worms and such. But they also seem to spend a lot of time preening themselves. One thing I noticed a lot of birds have in common with the robin is an eye ring. I suspect that the eye ring enhances its vision. Robins do spend a lot of time in the forest, so having a bright eye ring may help to gather light for the eye. When I posed the question to Google, I got no results though. Perhaps the commonality of eye rings in nature is coincidental, but I tend to doubt that. Most everything you find in the natural world tends to serve a purpose. And not surprisingly, I stumbled upon the remains of a depredated robin. And this sharp-shinned hawk was the likely culprit, since they do specialize in hunting songbirds. There's continuing to be increased deer activity. The does are congregating in herds, and the bucks are wandering around searching for these herds. Unfortunately for all these deer, the gun hunting season started Saturday. And it started with a bang. Over a dozen bangs actually were heard around the sanctuary. We even had to help a hunter from a neighboring property track a deer that he had wounded and wandered onto our property. It ended up being a first-year buck. It had lost a lot of blood, but still seemed pretty spry. We didn't finish the deer off because it still had a slim chance of survival. We set traps for the stray cats around the sanctuary so that we can spay or neuter them before releasing them. But sometimes other wildlife wanders into them, such as this Virginia possum. It wasn't the largest possum I'd ever seen, although I do think it was a little older. You can see it has some missing teeth and cavities. We did release the possum after taking a few photos. And we're still looking at moss around the sanctuary. This is a dicranum species, commonly known as broom moss. To be more specific, I believe it's boulder broom moss. Then this moss is a Physidens species, the maidenhair pocket moss. Notice how it somewhat resembles a bird feather. I was not able to identify this moss, but I really like the sporophytes on it. Here is some common haircat moss. And this is delicate fern moss in the middle, surrounded by, on the left, leafy liverwort, and on the right, an unidentified liverwort we're calling spinach liverwort. And here are some club mosses, closer relative to a fern than an actual moss. It is known as the southern ground cedar. Last week I found these mushrooms that I suspected were lactarius, and it turned out I was correct. This was verified by a stain I found in the leaves, presumably from the milky sap in the stem. I think these are mycenas because they are small, fragile, and growing in clusters around dead wood. And here is a thin maize polypore. What looks like old puffballs in this tree cavity. And here's a couple of unidentified fungi. And on this log, above the oysters and resinous polypore, are some lichens. I've been taking notice of lichens lately and plan to start a study on them. And that wraps up another great week at the sanctuary.